This video is going to be part one of a two-part AR lower build. I'm going to stop right after the trigger assembly, and then I'll pick up the next video going from the pistol grip buffer tube on back. In this video, I'm going to go over building a lower receiver for an AR, whether it's a 5.56, 300 blackout, or even an AR-10. They're all basically going to be about the same and everything, but basically just assembling the lower. Pretty simple. Anyone can do it. You can buy a bunch of fancy tools, or you can just use hopefully basic stuff that you have. I'm kind of new to the content creating thing, so if you would, give me a like, give me a subscribe, and share my video. I appreciate all your help. Thanks. As an infantryman in April of 2001, I ended up going to the armor school so that I could work on our unit's weapons and everything like that. And since then, I've been a government contractor that works on a foreign military sales contract that works regularly on Colt M4s and C8s. I was also the honor grad of the armor course that I went through, so I have a little bit of experience working with it as an infantryman, as a scout, in combat, and regularly through my job doing work and stuff for the government. All right, step one, make sure you have everything you need. Obviously, the receiver you're going to be working on, your buffer extension tube, your buffer spring, the buffer itself, castle nut, your rear plate, buttstock if you have one that you're already going to end up using, the buffer retaining pin, and the spring. Oh, it's magnetic. The spring that goes with it, it's going to be longer. You're going to have your bolt release. It's going to have a little plunger here, along with a smaller spring and a roll pin. You're going to have your pistol grip that you use, along with a bolt to put it in, and usually a washer or something that'll retain it and everything. Along with that, you're going to have your selector lever. There's going to be a spring for the selector lever that ends up going inside the grip, and then a detent pin that goes inside of that. You're going to have your hammer and your trigger, along with hammer and trigger pins that are identical, and then your little sear catch down here that attaches to it. You're going to end up having your hammer and trigger springs, your magazine release, which you're going to have the release button itself, a spring that goes with it, and the latch itself. If you're putting on a trigger guard on here, you're going to have the trigger guard and a roll pin that goes in there. This green spring right here is going to be for the sear trigger disconnect that goes in here. It's similar to the one that goes to the bolt catch, but it's going to be kind of tapered. It's going to have a wider end on one end. This one right here is going to be cylindrical, so this one will fit in the hole on the other side. This one right here won't fit if you try it, but there is a difference between these two springs that are similar. And the last part that I'm probably going to try and tackle first, the takedown pins. The front takedown pin can be a little bit harder. Both takedown pins have the exact same springs to go with them and the exact same detents to go with them. They basically are what connect the top and bottom of a AR-15 together. But the front one tends to give people a little bit of hassle. We'll see if on this video we can show how simple it can be done without having any fancy tools you have to buy or anything like that. All right, let's get started. All right, some basic things that I do is I'll put the parts in a magnetic tray to help hold them and everything. Have some tape, small hammer to tap with, magnet just in case. May not need vice grips or C-clamp type thing. Some pins. I probably won't use it, but you have a razor blade that you can use for the front takedown pin. Different pliers and stuff, along with some type of grease and oil and some kind of cloth rag or something to put stuff on. But you should have some basic tools with you when you get ready to assemble your lower. I like working front to rear. We're going to take the longer pin that has a flat side to it, and we're going to end up installing it on the front and go from the front to the back, lube the parts a little bit. Basically just insert your little piece, take this little small piece here. It's going to end up kind of popping out a bit possibly, but we're going to try and install it just pushing it straight in. If we get the pin lined up in here, we can just push it in all the way with the pin itself, and then push it straight in. You don't need any tools for it or anything like that. Just push it in and then work this in and out a few times to loosen it up and all that. Another way you can try and do it is by pushing with the pin in here and then just rotating it down and sliding it straight in. So there's two different ways you can do it, or you can get a fancy tool. Next will be installing the magazine release. Basically, you're going to have these three parts right here. It's easier to go on the back side and put the release through. Once you get that through, you can drop this bigger spring on here. And then what you're going to do is push in on this and kind of start to get it threaded. Once you get it started to be threaded, you want to make sure that the ridge side that you push on is going to be on the top part. It shouldn't be smooth on this part right here. But then you can end up pushing out on it and tightening it the rest of the way. What I like to do is sometimes use a punch on the back side to extend it out a little further, but you want to make sure that the nut screw that comes through here is kind of sticking out on the push part right here. I'll show you in a second. But what you can do is you can use a punch to push this in as far as you need as you rotate this side to line it up. When it's flush and it pops back in, you want to make sure that the nut or thread that's coming through here is basically flush. You really don't want it sticking out, but you don't want it sticking out too far on the spring thing either. So you're basically making the push button flush. Once it's in, just make sure it works properly and you're good to go on installing that part. Next up is going to be the bolt catch. You're going to have the bolt catch itself with the rib sides that go on here. You're going to have a plunger, a spring, and you're going to have a roll pin. Basically, put the plunger and spring in the hole. Take this and line it up so that it pushes in. Make it kind of flush with your thumb or your hand how you hold it. Should be able to push the roll pin in at first, and then from there tap it. If you have some sandpaper, you may need to round the edges a little bit better, but it'll fit in the little small hole here. Get it lined up and punch it through. I like to start out with a bigger punch to drive it in, and then a smaller punch to finish it up. But basically, it's just aligning the parts, using your thumb to kind of set the guide to where it's at, and getting it through. Once it's done, it should look like this. Another way to put the bolt release in is you can start the pin first off um, using a C-clamp or something like that, or tap. You just got to make sure you tape it off to tighten it. Make sure it's sticking out just a hair. You don't want to over extend the pin and everything. And then you can just drop in the parts you have, line it up, and if you push it back towards where the pin is, you should be able to find that sweet spot where it kind of clicks in. I don't know if you heard the little click there. And then it's basically tapping it through straight all the way, or using a C-clamp to tighten it up and push the pin all the way through with everything lined up. It's a little easier this way. And the biggest thing is just kind of how you manipulate this with your thumb for lining up how the pin goes through and everything. Once it's in, make sure it's flexible and everything and has that spring tension, and you're good on that part. Next, we're going to do the trigger guard. Most rifles come with them. Some don't necessarily come with them and everything. Just depends. But this is basically what's going to fold down if you want to use gloves or something like that shooting with it. On the receiver here, you'll see there's no hole on this side, and there is a hole on this side. So basically, this one piece here that has a clip, you can just kind of clip into here and pop in, and then work the other side to where it lines up. And you're basically going to take the roll pin, usually going from right to left, doesn't really matter, or from left to right, but line it up in here, and then basically just tap it in, and that'll put the trigger guard in place. Once it's lined up and it's snug, then you can continue to push it the rest of the way through, and then I usually finish up with a smaller punch just to make it look a little neater. And once you get the trigger guard, glove guard on, you go over here and use either tip of a bullet or a punch, and you can open it up, make sure that it swings freely. If it swings freely, it's good. And that part right there is done. Next we'll move on to the trigger assembly. This is the trigger. This is the disconnect that sits in here under spring tension. And this is the hammer. And your sear engagement is going to be this area right here and this area right here. They basically work together, and the disconnect locks on it, as you can see down here. And then when you pull the trigger and it slips, then the hammer will end up coming forward. So you want to make sure this area right here is smooth. You don't want to change the angle of it, but the smoother it is, the crisper your trigger pull will be. Just don't change the angle of it, but this is the area that kind of helps with the brake along with some of the spring tension and everything. All right, for the trigger, you're going to have the trigger itself, the disconnect, spring, the trigger pin, and the trigger spring itself. First thing to do usually is just to put the trigger spring on. This part's going to end up going underneath it, and you're basically just going to pop it up and over so that it's in place, loop underneath, pause to the front, and it's going to kind of sit in there. Next, you can put in the spring. Once the spring's in there, then what you're going to end up doing is getting the disconnect on. Once you get it kind of lined up like this, you're going to have to line up the hole with the disconnect and the trigger. It's going to go inside here, and then the pin's going to go through. So I'm going to put it in and show you from there. All right, so this assembly here, the spring tension under here, and you're going to have spring tension under here. But when you put it in, you got to basically line up 3 holes from here to the trigger to the disconnect and everything. But it goes in through here on the trigger part, and then you basically line it up to where the hole is. Get your pin. Usually I like the ridge side here to go in last because it's going to be kind of what helps clip and retain it. And then you just got to mess with it a little bit to get it all lined up. And once you get the parts lined up and everything, as far as with the disconnect, the sear and all that stuff, you can get it all the way in, and it'll pop and hold into place there. The spring's going to help keep it in place and everything. Next we'll move on to the hammer. All right, next we're going to have the hammer pin, the hammer, and the hammer spring. We'll go over this right here. I find it easiest to kind of put it on where the points here are kind of pointing upward, and you're basically going to slip it over kind of like the trigger spring, but it's a little harder. But if you do it where this part right here is down with the springs like this, and then rotate it over, and basically what's going to happen is you're going to fold these over, and this is going to provide your hammer fluctuation. So you want the open part front, and this part in the back, and then it's going to go in here. You're going to have to flex it back and put this pin through. Now, once you get to this part, you may want to end up putting some tape or something over here, but you don't want your hammer to hit the frame and the receiver and everything. So some people have a hammer block or something like that they can put in. Just be cautious, because once this goes in, you don't want your hammer hitting the aluminum frame and doing any damage to it or anything. Hopefully it'll show okay in here. On the trigger, there's some flats on it, but ultimately it's going to go in here. It's going to rest on the sides of the trigger, so you want to make sure it's spread right and not too far inside. It's going to fold over it like a hammer, and then you're going to line this up and put it into where the pinholes line up. You just want to hold it and flex it, and then put the pin through. And like I said again, normally going from this side with the notched end to go through it and everything. I'll show you how that goes. So once you get it kind of lined up under tension, you can get your pin in, and then you basically just have to line it up all the way with the right tension, and it'll click all the way through, and then the pins will hold it in. Like I said, be careful of the frame and hammer part, but it should lock back. This time right here, if you want, you can test it. Pull it and it goes forward. So like I said, it's set and good to go. Best to leave it forward so you don't accidentally set it off. We'll go over installing the pistol grip and the safety next.